Beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, and purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Brilliant, brilliant. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, John. Brilliant.
The words are different, but we stole a tune from another country.
So you may notice in the back here that I'm trying to be a little, like, Bobcat, but with a black background. We're with you, baby. We're with you, baby. All those that are listening, we're with you, baby. We're with you.
Oh, that's right. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, John. I'm doing great. We got some news today. Stuff is changing. So how is your day going?
It's going good. I have to, my hair hadn't been this long in 25 years. And so.
Are you going to go all the way?
I don't know, but it's looking mighty good.
Yeah, I think you got to keep going, John. You got to, where's that picture of your young self?
I have to wash it and pat it down and wash it. You think I should go all the way? What do you think?
Let me see. Put yourself next to yourself there for a moment. Come on, bring that up. Where's that cover of you?
You always ask for that picture. Here it is, right here.
But I want to see both of you at the same time. See who's better looking.
Can you see it?
Yeah. I'm telling you, that young Butler was amazing.
You guys been doing good?
Yeah.
Very well, thank you.
It's been a crazy week. How you doing, Llewelyn?
I'm doing quite well. Very busy. A lot going on.
Good. So I figure we would start with the obvious. Mr. Floyd should probably be made a saint or something for getting abused the way he did. No reason for handing over a $20 bill and whatever. I mean, it's like, give me a break. That's a Bernie Madoff treatment, it's a white collar crime. But what's going on, gentlemen? What's happening in America? All of a sudden, seems like the wheels are coming off. What's happening?
Well, you're hearing a cri de coeur, as the French say, a cry of the heart. An enormous number of people. And suddenly the sum of our frustrations is brought together. And it's not just African Americans or Hispanic Americans or Native Americans or Chinese Americans or white Americans. There is a lot of frustration, of hurt, of voicelessness that has suddenly found its voice. This happens in nations periodically. It's really amazingly complete today. The matter that killing the murder of Floyd is almost at this point secondary to a large airing of deeply felt unhappinesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think so, and I think the question is how do you deal with the murder of Floyd? But what I find very, very interesting, and remember I'm a child of the 60s, is that it's almost a perfect storm. So we have the virus, people are not working, we have frustrations. But what I find so interesting is how it has really, really like a wildfire gone over the world and also gone over to America. And also I find it very, very interesting, as Llewelyn said, in Austin it's mostly whites that's demonstrating. In Atlanta, I think most of the burning was done by whites. in Austin here, the only store that was really destroyed was owned by a black couple in on 6th Street. So I think that for people who haven't seen, as Llewelyn said, this happens every now and then.
Yeah.
And for people who haven't seen it, I think the big question is this: what is the basic kind of solution? And if you look at Black Americans, less than a third of Black Americans are in poverty. If you look at other people in America and look at the immigrants, people are coming here by the truckloads. So we have an interesting kind of situation, Llewelyn. Okay,
I think we have a lot of people who feel that they're left out, that they have insecure jobs or no jobs, poorly paid jobs, very poorly paid jobs.
But
they can't get out of debt. Many of them are in eternal credit card debt. It takes about 28 years to pay off a credit card at the minimum payment. Many people are enslaved to debt. And many feel there is no way out. They work 2 jobs. It isn't a way out because they're not making enough money. And they have the sense that others are doing better. But going back to this idea of a national and international, for that matter, expression of something. We've seen it before, and it's not always unhappiness. Sometimes it's something else. For example, the death of Princess Diana. I never understood it, but it was an international outpouring of some commonly held feeling. Here, an outpouring of a very commonly held feeling. In little West Warwick, Rhode Island, no blacks, some Hispanics, some people from the Verde Islands, some whites, a little bit of damage, but what brought them to the streets? And I want to tell you something, because I too am a child of the 60s, and I've been through this. I'm a reporter, so I've seen it close up for a long time. I've been through demonstrations against colonial rule in Africa. I've been through demonstrations in London against nuclear armament. I've been through demonstrations on picket lines across America. And I went through the big one, well, now this is the big one, but the biggest to this point in time after the assassination of Martin Luther King. There was another one of these huge outpourings that inside the dynamic of a riot or of a demonstration is very interesting, and it's worth knowing about. It's very humane. There's a great sense of camaraderie, of being together. I walked from the Washington Daily News, where I worked at that time, down to the National Press Club in Washington, in the middle of the Martin Luther King riot. People looting stores, people were, and they were so solicitous of my well-being. They were primarily black people, but yet there was the sense that somehow they were doing something very important. The fact is that the price was terribly high. It took 40 years to rebuild that part of Washington, which was known as Shore, which was ravaged. The price is often very high, but at the time, sometimes you have to let it all hang out. And it takes you back to the movie Network. I'm mad and I can't take it anymore. There's a lot of that present. We are in more than 100 cities, and more towns have seen demonstrations. That is phenomenal. That goes beyond anger over the police abuse and murder of one man. The police have done many things that are unspeakable. This is the trigger to let out a huge cry of anguish in the nation.
Well, I think I agree with that, but also I have seen the killing of President Kennedy, the killing of his brother, Robert Kennedy, the shooting of George Wallace that made him a cripple, the assassination also of Martin Luther King. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm a Vietnam veteran, but what I find interesting here is the dilemma that I find interesting. For the stories that's coming out since the birth of America, everyone is trying to get to America. So I believe that when you start with the concept of racism, which I think is a primitive term, which is very, very difficult to define, because in America it's defined by opportunity. You know, I think that we have a vision of America of an assimilation process, but I see America as homophily. I see different groups getting together getting themselves together and then entering, the larger society, right? For example, as a Southerner, I don't think of anything that I want that I needed under what they call segregation, because there was homophily. You had Dillard, you had Xavier, being a Louisiana boy, you had Morehouse, you had Spelman. So this was interesting. As we talk about these things, and I agree with you about the frustration, but then if you look at people that's trying to come here, everybody's trying to come here for the opportunity structure. So I think if we get back on the opportunity structure, right? And then as I look at the 60s being there was no burning in the South because the blacks own all of the enterprises there, right? They never did burn Birmingham because they owned the business section. But I agree with the frustration. But I think if we begin and end with opportunity, because people that come here, they're coming here not to love each other, not to vote. They're coming for the opportunity. So I have books on immigrant entrepreneurship, and I've never known one come here to vote. They came here to make money and to do well. So I think in the context of all the frustration and all of this is a racist country, is the idea that if you look at a recent book by Todd Hamilton called Immigration and the Remaking of Black Americans, and look what Africans are doing in America in terms of education and business enterprise. If you look at my book, An American Story, Mexican American Wealth Creation in America. So, these groups that the news people really talk about, there's a tradition there. They're so strong in terms of the opportunity structure. So we got this very interesting dialectic going on. A country that provides opportunities where everybody want to be, and then these incidents where it blows up and everybody goes back to the racism argument.
I think you're somewhat, John, I know what you're saying, but I think you're somewhat mixing apples and pears here. All of the prosperous countries, or relatively prosperous countries, have tremendous inward migration pressure, whether it's the United Kingdom, Germany, even Greece, Italy. Well, Greece is not that prosperous because conditions, bad as they are better in the prosperous countries than they are in the totally disintegrated third world countries. I myself am from Zimbabwe. I was born there. I grew up there. We called it Rhodesia in those days. People there would think to get to America today would be a godsend. But that is not a reason to keep people or to overlook the unhappiness in our own country. I was in Sri Lanka once and they showed me a Victoria's Secret or a contractor who made women's underwear. And they told me with pride that you could buy retail in Sri Lanka a woman's sundress for $1 or a pair of panties or a bra for 50 American cents. And they had rows of these poor girls sitting there selling like chickens in a battery arrangement for eggs. Well, the fact is that they were better off than they had been on the farms, but they were not well off. And that is the root of migration. Migration people will always seek a better deal for themselves and for their children. But there are an awful lot of people, first generation, third generations, maybe descendants of slaves, who are not getting a better deal anymore. They feel there is no upward mobility for them, and that if anything, things are being subtracted. Real wages are going down. Real wages are not going up. And that is a huge problem. When real wages stagnate, you get the well-to-do moving up and you get the poor moving down. Now, whether you push another 1 million into the official poverty bracket, if you're anywhere near the top end of the poverty bracket, you're in pretty shocking shape. And you are not going to expensive football games or sitting on boards of directors or getting tenure in a university. You are hand to mouth, job to job in a very brutal and brutalizing part of the social spectrum. And you should not forget that. It is very easy for us to reflect our own situation. One of the things that happened, and we mentioned this on this program previously, is that because of the coronavirus, we suddenly had, and you mentioned the media, which is predominantly middle-class white, with lots and lots of tokens, but predominantly middle-class white, talking about it in their own terms, not in the terms of what would happen if you had 3 families living in one apartment, not in terms of what is happening to Native Americans, where it is the most prevalent and where the death rates are the highest per capita. We looked at it as it affected us, which is not an unreasonable thing to do. And it took a long time before we started realizing that we were not the universal truth about the ravages of this disease in society. It's much more prevalent among terribly prevalent among Native Americans and very high among Hispanic Americans. But we looked at it in one way for a while. But due to the difficulties we have, the underlying things, in front of me here, across the room, is a telephone devoted to White House Chronicle, the television program on PBS, originating with Howard University Television in Washington. And there it's ringing now. On cue. But during the Obama administration, people ring it because they think it's the White House. And most of the calls that came in on that phone were racist. They were ugly.
Really?
We still have the chief so-and-so up there, the N-word. Every one of the calls, 9 out of 10 calls were the N-word addressed at Obama. Since then, we don't get very many, and they usually just, I want help with this, or some of them are conspiratorial, but the racism, we stopped hearing it in this apartment when Trump was elected. It didn't go away. They felt they were justified. They felt in some way they had won. He had blown on the embers of racism, and I don't like the word. I never particularly subscribe to the sense of axiomatic victimization because of a race. But the truth is that we have really brought the divisions in society together. And we're a complex nation. We're multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious. And if you don't respect that and don't have a society where respect is part of how it works, which is true, say, of the cantons in Switzerland, you have one huge mistake which periodically will erupt, as we've seen this giant eruption fed by a racial situation that has brought forth all of the other hurts and unpleasantnesses, not all of them racist at all or having any racial background. Poverty and frustration are the large feeders of these demonstrations.
I think I would agree with most of that, but I was always trying to get the contract to make the sheets for the Klan. That is, I'm more focused on the opportunity structure, and I think as my grandfather would say, if you have resources and you're not happy, then you're shopping in the wrong place. So I like to put the emphasis on the whole idea of opportunity structure. I cannot take out my time and change people who are racist. My debates in college was with the Klansman, David Duke, and he had every right to say what he had to say. And I always thought that I was better looking and smarter. And so why should
Indubitably, yes.
So why should I stop to worry about the
right.
So what I'm saying is you can't go down a line where you get concerned about people who are racist and using the N-word. You have to go at the Booker T. Washington line and say, okay, we have to concentrate on the opportunity structure. To me, if I go and concentrate on that, I'm going down the wrong line. So I just think that the opportunity structure is where it's at with me. And when you get into this, as the diversity literature is who likes who and who don't like who. And my deal is, okay, I know you don't like me, but can we go and make some money together? So I think
I like that idea. I like opportunity structure. Certainly, I've sought it myself. I'm a high school dropout from Southern Rhodesia, and I sought it with some success in London. I sought it with some success in New York, and my gosh, I'm on this television broadcast with you two, so I must have reached sort of finish.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
But I think you both.
Given that the opportunity structure fails when people have no access to the ladder.
Well, so here's a couple of
I can
thoughts.
create another ladder in America.
Yeah,
I
but
agree with you, but I can
here's
create
couple-
another ladder. Yes. Mhm.
Here's a couple of thoughts. And I think you guys are, reflecting really well this whole, complex situation that we're living, which is really been going on for hundreds of years and what have you. But here's the thing that I think is really fascinating, right? And sometimes we tend to make, humans tend to dwell on things that are really difficult to ponder. And I go back to my grandma and my godfather had very, very simple ways of looking at life, and I'm sure it'll relate to you. But and then I have come up with a few that I give to my kids and my students when I teach. But my grandma used to say all the time that we should only focus on the things that we could make a difference ourselves, things that we could control, and not worry at all about the things that we couldn't control. So that's why I make my bed every morning and I bounce a quarter of it. And if that bounces right and I catch it, I'm good. So simple things like that, right? I focus on what I can make it in. And so I love the whole opportunity construct and opportunity thinking. The other thing about it, back to a point that you were making, Llewelyn, is that if you think about success, right, and how do you define success, you and I and all of us would agree that success is slightly different. For John, it would involve golf and football and other things. For you, it would involve, reading and traveling and other things, certainly not football. For me, it would involve maybe basketball and other things, right? But here's the thing that I came up with a long time ago that I think is really key. And really puts a call to action to those that are listening, that are feeling impeded or not part of the party. They're not in the party. They're outside the party. They're looking in. Everybody's having a good time, making good money, but they're not in it. And here's the thing: success happens, and this is you call it Carvallo's law, whatever you want to call it, but success happens when opportunity meets preparation. And the opportunities are a million a dozen going on. Go build a COVID testing equipment. The government will give you a contract for $5 million. You can build one right now. There are opportunities at any given moment galore. I mean, hundreds, thousands, millions of opportunities. The question is, are you prepared? Are you trained? Are you able to recognize the opportunity and act on it and succeed and be the best at it in the world at it? And so I think that's the key. And back to what John is talking about, focus on the opportunity, that, what I can do is prepare. So I read, I hang out with you guys. I'm on top of my game. I'm trying to keep up with things. I buy gadgets. I study things. I'm sharpening my saw every day. Now, the people who are not in that mode, trying to make a difference for themselves and their families, I think, are, eventually find themselves not being able to keep up, and then eventually falling behind. So it really goes back to, are you making your bed every morning? Are you making a difference to your own things? Are you aware of the opportunity?
This is not going to help, John, to go and tell this to people in the streets today, that your little homily about quoting essentially the alcoholic's prayer, about, dear Lord, let me effect those things I can, not those I cannot, is not going to solve fundamental social perceptions of failure, which is why people are in the streets, why they were in the streets last night, and why they'll be in the streets tonight. There is something big. There is a bellow of hurt. And if we don't hear it, we will see more of this, and we will see a disintegration in our social structure. People who come out of the schools and don't have any sort of education because the schools are shockingly bad and some of the universities are not too good either. Mm-hmm. Out of those institutions who can hardly read and write are doomed. And the opportunity, if you're working as a meat cutter at an abattoir at low wages, great danger, the most dangerous job in the country, even if you've got a fairly good job driving long-haul truck, you won't make enough money to get out of the predicament that you find yourself in, work as hard as you will. So while the American dream is a shimmering and glorious thing to people trying to get a green card, when you're living it at the bottom, not the top, not the middle, but at the bottom, it is a nightmare, not a dream. And that is what these people are protesting, and that is what has to be addressed through our political system, or we'll have something like revolution.
But do you guys think the government can really deliver the answers to those problems?
Well, let me first of all do some correction. It was Tom Landry, the great cowboy coach, said, when preparation, meets, when luck meets preparation, that's when luck, whatever you just said.
It's much better to have rich parents.
Yeah, and then the other thing.
Like a dream.
So we have 100+ years in American society to examine this idea of success and where it comes from. My job as I write books on entrepreneurship. I have a book on entrepreneurship and self-help among Black Americans, which is its 65th printing, where I look at all the wealthy Blacks since the 1700s. And then what you have to do, and by the way, the wealth stuff does not relate. I mean, there's a great book called Dying of Whiteness, where they look at poor whites and look at their situation as, why have they accepted their lot? So when you start talking economics, you got to get away from the race and ethnicity. And when I say race, I mean Black and white. Being a Black Southerner, if you weren't Black, you went to the white bathroom, so everybody was white as far as I'm concerned. So my point is, I think that we have to look at models. You're exactly right, Llewelyn. How do we get out of this mess? So let me give you a case real fast. At one time, Miami, Florida was a doomed city. It had lots of poverty, and Castro took over Cuba, and he said there will be a new Havana, but that Havana happened to be Miami. And it was Miami because the people who came over could not speak the English language, but they had a vision of creating a city where there was entrepreneurship and there were companies and all of a sudden Miami is a great city, not because of Washington, D.C., because of the entrepreneurs that came over.
If you go down west of Miami to Opelika, an area like that is some of the most atrocious poverty you see in this country.
Well, let me finish. So I can take you to Atlanta, Georgia. I can take you to Jackson, Mississippi. I can take you to the old historical Black enclaves. In my family, you're right, Llewelyn, I am a silver spoon. I am a 4th generation college graduates. And what happens is all the sisters had to go to private Black schools, because I went to undergrad at LSU and PhD at Northwestern. It was all done by entrepreneurs and parents who are entrepreneurs. So I think for us to get out of this, you have to concentrate on how can you do the stuff on the opportunity structure. Now, what can the government do? Well, the government has to prepare the country to have better opportunities and don't get in the way of the entrepreneurs to create better opportunities. And people will have to hire people. Now, I believe that there can be different ladders that's created in America. If I look at Min Zou's book on Chinatown, it's an interesting book because she talks about how the Chinese, whether it's in New York or whether it's in San Francisco, that the opportunity structure is created and the idea is created within Chinatown, and then people kind of leap out. Well, when I look at my own history, these enclaves, and you look at where people went to school, they go to all kinds of schools, all kinds of colleges, but that's the model. That's the model. If you want to learn how to hit a golf ball, I don't go ask Andre Carvalho, I go ask Tiger Woods. If I want to know how to do well, I don't go to Opelika and study. I go to Atlanta and study, right? Or I go to other places. So I think that getting out of this will be very, very interesting. But the point is, within all of those groups, there are models of success. Models of success since the 1700s, what they all have in common, right? I mean, Llewelyn, the boatload of Black success was doing in the South under the most intense form of segregation, right? But the creation of schools, the creation of communities. Let me remind you that Martin Luther King was a third generation Morehouse graduate. So his parents and grandparents were there and concentrated on opportunity structure. But I think that the economic goes beyond race. It goes beyond those kind of things. But you're right, it is hard living on the very, very bottom. But my question is, how do people move from the bottom to the middle and from the middle to the top? If you look at the study of millionaires in America, I think 80% of them were lower middle class when they started. So this is why I like to concentrate on the opportunity structure. But misery, to be at the bottom does not mean you have to stay at the bottom. The question is, how do you move around?
Okay, let me pause real quick. I gotta share my screen due to our acknowledgement of our sponsors. And I got some news on the Digital 360 Summit real quick. So for those of you who are new to us, we have our annual summit, the Digital 360 Summit, scheduled to begin on August 18th. It was going to be a 3-day event face-to-face. We've decided to go virtual. So now it's going to start on August 18th and it's going to go all the way to September 15th. There will be sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays for about 7 weeks, I'm sorry. And there'll be 3-hour sessions, 1.5 hour with a half-hour break. And so we'll share a schedule on that. We have been dealing with how we're gonna, basically reinvent this event due to COVID-19. And so here's the list of speakers and companies that have confirmed to participate and grace us with their knowledge, including our own Llewelyn King, and our own Dr. John Butler. And then, there's a website out there, but that website needs to be updated to reflect the new change on the schedule. And then last but not least, our sponsors for the Digital-Roundtable, the Smart Water Summit, Smart Utility Summit. I'm assuming those events are going to happen face-to-face. Really don't know yet. Stay tuned for that. So anyway, I'll pause now and stop on that and come back to you guys. So real quick before I want to shift the conversation and maybe come back and loop it around, but I want to update everybody and update you guys. So COVID deaths are up. The highest number right now is 106,202, 106,202. That's up 7,000 from last week. Total cases are up 180,000 in 1 week. Total cases now is 1.8 million cases. Unemployment is supposed to hit 40 million or 28% by the end of the year. And that's probably the biggest reason why we're having all these challenges and unrest. People don't know what to do with their time. They're not making money. They're busy and they can't pay their bills and they're frustrated and everything is piling on that. Nevertheless, the stock market is up about 900 points from last week at 26,150. Since March 15th, you can see a V recovery on many companies like Amazon, and then you can see a much taper recovery like the banks and utilities and companies like that. It's really fascinating. So in terms of dollars, not percentage, some stocks have rebounded over 300% since March 15. But March 15 is roughly when COVID hit us and everybody started shutting down. Amazon stock is up $700. Tesla is up 600. Zoom is up 110. Apple is up 90. Facebook is up 80. Square is up 40. Snap is up 15. In the case of Snap, for example, just $15 up, it's actually up 120%. since March 15th. What do you think is happening, guys? The economy, unemployment is high. We're still dealing with the recovery. People getting checks. I've heard and talked, unscientifically that most folks that have small businesses have gotten checks from government for the 2.5 month that they allow for that $3 billion loans. There are 2-year loans that start accruing in January 1st at 1%. The stock market seems to be coming back. There's a lot of talk about manufacturing coming back. So I get the whole, desperation, Floyd, make justice, find justice, put the guy in jail, what have you. What's going on with the recovery? What are you all seeing?
I think that it's very dangerous to take the stock market as the only measure of the performance of an economy. I remember in Brazil when its stock market was shooting through and the country was failing. It's an indicator, but it's only an indicator of part of an economy. It is most of the endeavors that make up that economy. It's going to stay high temporarily because the money supply has been vastly increased by the Federal Reserve Board. And because there is nowhere else for people who have money to put it but in the stock market. The stocks you read out are those that reflect the current prosperity in a small number of areas of endeavor, which is companies that depend on the internet, that service people at home, like Zoom, which we are using now, like Amazon. That kind of company is not really that reflective. I'd have to look at least, I haven't done so, but I'd have to look at the 500 stocks, but very strange things are happening. I've been looking at a stock of a company that, because I'm writing about it, which has made no profit whatsoever, has no customers yet, is well financed, and the stock has shot up. That makes no sense. Another stock that I was writing about, or broadcasting about actually, interviewed the CEO on television, that stock, they may have not a solution, but a medicine to help people in hospitals with COVID-19 and possibly an inoculation to help them, the country at large. That's unproven, but their stock has gone up 500%. This is a casino. This is not science. This is a casino. This is a lot of money. There are people who have a lot of money. Also, one of the frustrations of the present time is the difference in income between those at the bottom and those at the top. And I'll give you an example. You know what the minimum wage is, and you know the fight getting up to $15. But in about 2020, at the turn of the century, at the turn of the century, utility executives were making about $2 million a year each, which seemed not disproportionate to the responsibility. Now they're making between $15 and $25 million a year. Nothing has changed in the utility business, except that they are being better rewarded than they ever, and for no apparent reason. Well, if you're making that kind of money, you have an awful lot of it to plow into the stock market, and that is happening. You have these huge fortunes that are coming out of the .com companies like Google, and the money's going in the stock market. But it doesn't reflect a general prosperity. It doesn't reflect a widespread well-being at all. It's an anomaly, not a fundamental.
John?
Well, yeah, I think, there are two economies, the economy of goods and services and the economy of money and credit. And I think the stock market, you're exactly right. It does not reflect the totality of the company or the country, but it reflects the future of the country. That is, you're willing to bet on the fact that the stock market will be here in the future. In 1932, the people who left their money in the stock market created more wealth when it really tended to come back. So I think the stock market has always been a place where the idea of investments and the idea of finance take place. Let me remind you that the only difference between us and the cave people is our ability to predict the future based on numbers. In the old days, there might be a civilization that burned a goat, and if the smoke went to the left, they did one thing. If it went to the right, they went to the other thing, did the other thing. But modern economies with finance, which has the ability to sit down with Llewelyn and say, here's the deal. If you give me $10 today, in 35 years, that $10 will be worth $850,000. That is, we have the ability to try to project the future and understand the future, and that's what makes the stock market so appealing. But to play the stock market, you got to realize it's not only just the wealthy involved, it is our 401ks that's involved, it is our savings that's involved. So actually, it used to be that the stock market was really related to just wealthy people, but somewhere along the way, and I don't know how Llewelyn allowed this to happen, the whole idea of a defined retirement went out of the way. And the company said, you know, John Butler, I have no responsibility for you. You're gonna take the responsibility yourself. You're gonna invest in this 401k, and we're gonna match it. And that is not a retirement. That is a saving, and that thing can be related, as we can see today. Right. So I think that economy is there. I think it will also always be there, but it's a good indication of what you believe in the country. The other thing Llewelyn said is correct. It is a Las Vegas on companies. That is, it is a Ponzi scheme, if you will, on companies, but it's a legitimate Ponzi scheme with rules and with regulations. So I think the stock market will continue to blossom because people think the economy will come rolling back, and it might not. But here's the deal: unlike earlier days, we know what caused this economy to drop. We know what happened and what caused the unemployment that we're going through now. It was one single thing. We had one of the most dynamic economies in job creation and wealth creation going on before COVID.
That's right.
So the question is, if I'm an investor, which I am, then you would have to say, once we get COVID done, it's going to come back. Mm-hmm. That is the economy of money and credit. That is not the economy of goods and services. That's not the economy of the person who has to work. So what we have done, Llewelyn, I don't know how you guys did this when you were in Washington, you have said to the average American, okay, you're making $40,000 a year, here's your 401k, now the 401k is gone. So how do we get the average American back to a defined retirement and out of this magical thing that the 401k is going to be there when you retire? It is not a defined retirement.
John, you may be interested to know that I have been so interested in what happens when you put more money into the stock market, because I was very impressed when the defined benefits, when that money was put into the stock market, because it produced an enormous liquidity which enabled business to expand. I was so impressed with this that some years ago I called a conference in Washington, put together a conference on what would happen if we privatized Social Security in its totality and put it in the stock market. That, by the way, was originally a democratic idea, and it was tried in Chile. And we got people who came from all over the world because they were so interested in it. By this point, it had become a Republican idea, and the Democrats were opposing it. And we had some of the best minds in finance at the time to talk about it. The woman who is now the editor of The Economist, Pete Peterson, the billionaire, and many others. And we pretty well thrashed it out. And the thought was that because there are crashes, because that it maybe was just too risky. It's not for me to call that, but I did take a very hard look at that and put a lot of effort into it. I thought that the putting of the pension funds into the stock market did wonders for business, but you haven't addressed the issue of the growth in the money supply and what that does. Does that produce inflation, or can you do it? And by the way, a lot of the prosperity you refer to came from a tax cut, which in fact was borrowing from future generations. It was not an indigenous addition of new business.
Yeah. So I want to make a point to basically reinforce something that you guys have been saying. You know, the latest data that I got here on the impact of COVID, negative impact. So apparently, and this is all, you know, very well documented data, collection of taxes by states and cities are on average down 50% or more. Do you all think that that's bad? What's going to happen? How does that, is it possible to recover from that? What is going to happen in terms of cities going bankrupt, not being able to meet their obligations? The U.S. economy so far has contracted $7.9 trillion. So again, you know, I think we know how we want to get out of here, John, with an opportunity thinking, but seems pretty dramatic drop in what's going to happen with the cities and the states and their budgets.
Well, what has been happening is a bailout by Washington, D.C. We don't have to print money anymore. It's all digital. So again, given the idea that it was caused by a natural disaster, so during Katrina, the idea was that the city itself cannot recover from its own business incentives in doing things. So you needed a massive way to bring it back. So what I envision is that for a while, there would be the hitting of the button to print the billions of dollars to keep these cities alive. And then in the future, they would have to kind of go on their own. So I think what has been happening with and by the way, I don't call it a stimulus. It is something else. Stimulus is when you want to stimulate something that's already there. I think this might be an idea of a recovery.
A revival.
A revival. And remember, in our economic models from Chicago, in all of our models with equilibrium theory, we know that earthquakes are there. We know that pandemics are there. We know that storms are there, but we do not have them in the mathematical equation to predict what would happen to the economy. So when things go out of the math, then the question becomes how to recover. And the answer is, just like a hurricane, you declare a disaster by Washington, D.C., and you don't print money in a way. You just hit the button and you send $8 billion to whatever state you want to go to. And now the question of inflation is one thing. Now, the other thing we have to deal with very, very, very interesting is that lots of people, I don't know the numbers, but in working with enterprises here in Austin, a lot of people are getting more money by not going back to work based on their unemployment. And that can be a problem itself. But I think to sum it up, Andreas, in the idea when there's a natural disaster, then the government comes in and props up things until it can get better. And I think that's what's been happening at the individual level and at the institutional level.
Yeah. Llewelyn?
Well, I think we don't know. Yes, you're right. We're going to use federal credit and the ability to push a button and therefore to invent money, which is metaphorically referred to as printing money. That's going to happen on a large scale because there isn't much choice, but there are going to be adjustments. There's going to be a lot more austerity in the states. It's going to come down particularly hard on things like Medicaid. It's going to come down on a lot of programs that the states administer. It's going to be a period of difficult adjustment. Now, I've just, by the way, published this week my column, you should have gotten it, you guys, that I think there's going to be a surge in innovation. And I think 10 years out, we will have recovered and more than recovered. But getting from here to there is going to essentially be the 1930s all over again. And you asked, Andre, whether government could help, and the fact is government helped a lot in the 1930s. We're going to see quite a remarkable replay of that. We're going to need to absorb into some kind of system, some productive system, a large number of people who have lost their jobs and will not have other jobs for 5, 7, 10 years. not because we're not going to see all the companies come back, and structural changes. For example, working at home, that does something not only to real estate, it does something to people who maintain buildings, people who work in, people who come at 6 o'clock at night to clean the buildings. So, anytime you mess with anything in an economy, it goes throughout the economy. It is not confined. It is not a small local contagion. We're going to have a very difficult time. It is going to be made more difficult if we are not cognizant, and that's the first stage, to be aware of the great unhappiness that is being exhibited every night on the streets of the United States and sometimes in other countries, but it is a US phenomenon, and it has to be addressed by listening and by understanding the dynamics of frustration. The beginning of solving the dynamics of frustration is to understand them. And we've moved under this Trump administration, not in that direction, but in a different direction, which is to castigate people we don't agree with, to denigrate them, to vilify them, and suddenly all of this is coming home to roost in a very terrible way.
And let me comment on something that was so profound that you said earlier, Llewelyn. The idea of debt, the idea of credit cards, what my grandfather called high-tech sharecropping. If you look at the debt that people are in, or as I said earlier, you look at it and ask, how many months can a person go? How much savings do they have? If you take all of the problems that we have and look at the reality of our system, the reality of our system is there will be bankruptcies. People will pay their debt. But then if you look at and ask another question, how do we get out of the credit card kind of arena where there is high-tech sharecropping that really goes against your future and the future generations? Do we go back to cash and carry? You don't remember that what that is, my distinguished host, cash and carry, where when I first bought my first electric football set.
Oh yeah.
I put down $4 and took the $7 later, and then they gave it to me when I paid for it. But the debt and the debt service on this generation of professionals, college kids, law schools. Well, how do we change the mindset about high-tech sharecropping, which I call credit cards?
Well, I like that phrase very much, and I shall use it abundantly.
Well, that's okay. I'm using yours. I read all of your stuff, and I'm not stealing it. I'm borrowing it. But I just want you to say, as John Sibley Butler said,
I don't have an answer, but I'm so glad you posed the question. I had a failing family member in South Africa, and I used to have to go to one of these outlets, one of the payday lenders.
Yes.
They had a MoneyGram system for my sending money to my brother who subsequently passed. But it was a sad place. I mean, people coming in to pay on their $400 loan, huge, seemingly large sums of money. And it left me in two minds. It didn't force me to say, this is monstrous and should not be allowed. It caused me to wonder, what would these people do without it? On the other hand, I realized that more and more of their disposable income was going to pay for the money they had borrowed. And just with regular credit cards, at 27.5, you're the mathematician, do it. It takes about 28 years to pay off your balance if you don't buy anything more. That is a tremendous obligation. Then you have the people coming out of university burdened with debt. I mean, what a terrible way to begin your life, with debt. It's a good start for a career. And that's not going to get you in the stock market if all your disposable money has to pay for the money you borrowed to get the education, to get the job that now gives you disposable money. That is a very poor setup. So we're going to have to look at debt, the role of debt. We may also want to look at how much interest is allowable. You and I, John, and maybe Andre, remember a time when people who charged 27, 28% were sent to jail. They were considered to be from the mafia.
Yes. Right.
Now it is fully legitimate, and Bank of America will happily lend you on a credit card at those rates. We've got to have usury laws, and we've got to apply them to financial institutions. We've got to look at this whole matter of how the money filters down in society. We've got to stop that. What George Will, formerly a conservative columnist, said about the high salaries in public companies, whether they were earning it or just taking it. We need to address these things. One, because of the resentment that high salaries produce, pointlessly high salaries, except to those earning them. The companies fail. The head of Boeing, who destroyed one of the great companies, got like $60 million as a bye-bye. These things contribute to the sense of hopelessness of not having chips in the game, which is what is fueling the demonstrations.
Yes, but on the other hand, we can guarantee equal opportunity, but we can't guarantee equal outcomes. So I know that
we can't guarantee equal opportunity.
Right. We can seek
opportunity. We can
seek to guarantee equal
opportunity. If you have the right qualifications, the right background, opportunity in this field or that field. It is interesting why, for example, Jews dominate Hollywood, because it was the work they could do at that time. And there's nothing wrong with that. You have these movements, but equal opportunity we do not have and have not had. When I came to the United States, I had already been pretty successful. I went to the New York Times to get a job, and they said, no, you don't have a degree, you can't work here. I'd worked for the BBC in England. The network said, you can't work here, you don't have a degree. Equal opportunity? Come on.
But I think what we do is go forward.
Well, whether I could do the work, in fact, you guys in the university set up so many barriers, so many impediments to the successful climbing of the ladder of ambition that it is pathetic and reprehensible.
I think it's true, but we still have a whole idea if you have the opportunity. And I think you've done well in America. So we can guarantee some kind of opportunity, but we can't guarantee equal outcomes. So
well, I think you can remove the impediments, you can modify the impediments, you can take them out of the way, and you could give people relevant educations. I'll tell you about a very interesting college I've done some reporting on in South Carolina, where it's a liberal arts college, but they teach a trade. The interesting thing, John, and you will find this interesting, is that of the student body, which is very small, but about 1/3 of them within 5 years starts their own business because they've learned either stone cutting, blacksmithing, carpentry, framing carpentry, or finish carpentry, or drawing. They have trades. You can go and do it. The universities are turning out people guaranteed to have difficulty in getting a job because there are no jobs. You cannot start a company doing sociology. You cannot start a company teaching history. You cannot have a boutique in musical studies. You've got to turn out a working population qualified for the work available or the possibilities, and that is not happening. And you've got to improve the high schools, because the high schools are really where the problem is.
So I do agree that there are great trade schools, but I think without that liberal arts, you can't do anything in the world either.
No, I agree. I'm a liberal arts fanatic. I'm all in favor of it. I think we should all read because of the joy and pleasure and enrichment of reading, not because it helps you get a job or talk better.
So let me share my theory as we're closing here on how we solve all these problems. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Here it is. I'm going to leave it on the record for you, my witnesses. It's very simple. We're going to eliminate poverty. We're going to pay for the retirements. Everybody's going to be happy. Here it is. A human being generates, on average, if it was recorded, all our actions on a daily basis, roughly 10 terabytes of data a year. Just like most of us have a carbon footprint anywhere from 12 12 tons to 24 tons of CO2 per year, we generate roughly 10 terabytes of data, of information about who we are, where we go, what we eat, where we shop, what we look like, our size, our habits, everything. So if you take the cost of a gigabyte today, so the 10 terabytes is roughly 10,000 gigabytes. The cost of a gigabyte today in the big network called the internet goes 2 gigabytes of data costs roughly 25 bucks. So that means that a human being that has no job but generates data, and that data is used by somebody else, Facebook, Amazon, advertisers, whoever, that individual should get paid $110,000 a year for the privilege of anybody using their data. So what do you think of that?
I think that's an interesting business model.
I think actually within that there are nuggets that are fascinating.
Yes.
There really are. It is the inadvertent contribution to the economic well-being, and you would think I might dump on it, but no, I see virtue in it. I do think that's very important. I think, of course, that you will generate more data if you can afford a computer. And
Sure.
Andre, it's advertising. It's taking my wonderful photograph and paying me for the use of my photograph. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely an upside. There's an upside beyond that. But I'm saying to you all, just you recording my data every day, 24 hours a day, everything I do, my sleeping patterns, my eating patterns, everything, all my data, you record it.
It's a small fee not to have that.
And it's roughly 10 terabytes of data. Yeah, but if you are in the bottom of the totem pole, Llewelyn, and you don't know how to come up, what if I could create a business model that compensates you for being, for living, for creating, for doing, and you are actually compensated for everything you do, for every breath that you take?
But let's put a footnote here. People move up all the time in America.
Yeah, absolutely. But my point is, if the lowest common denominator of just being alive is that you get $110,000 a year for sharing your data for living, that changes the whole equation.
Well, if you can put the business.
How do you collect the data from the homeless?
Oh, that's the easy part.
Okay. Well, it's a fascinating idea.
I think so you heard it here first. Let's work on this, because I think that's where we're heading. Data is the new gold. Every ounce of data created by any human should be compensated.
Interesting. As Llewelyn said, there's a lot of great ideas in there.
There really are. It's interesting. I don't think it'll solve problems, but I have a solution.
But if I generate a lot of dollars, a lot of data, do I get more?
No, I've got the solution.
Of course.
The solution is to run John Palmer for president, and this country will be in fabulous shape as soon as
Run who for president?
You.
Well, my grandfather told me the White House was public housing, just like the projects, and stay out of it. You can use that too. I said, I want to be governor of Louisiana and president of the United States. And my father said, the governor lives in public housing, and the White House is public housing. Make enough money to buy your own big White House, and make enough money to fly your own private plane. Don't let anybody give it to you. So I'm going to stick with what my traditional grandfather said. The White House is public housing, just like the city projects.
There you go. It's true.
Well said.
Hey, John, take us away with the guitar.
Okay, I will. If you get the feeling all alone, when your good time friends have all got up and gone, don't come knocking around my door, because I've heard your lines before. There ain't gonna be a next time, this time. Woman, starting right now. I'm gonna forget your mind and your pretty face and write you off as a bad mistake. You know that some people, they are lovers and some just got no sense. But a woman like you ought to be ashamed of the things that you do to me.
Excellent, Johnny. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week, and stick around, guys, unless you got to jump off. Let me stop recording here.